Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Session 2, Trade in Services and Investment. The session is now open.
Okay, so good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, depending upon from where you are being connected with us today. So welcome again to this Session 2 on the Trade and Services Investment of the RCEP. As we know, the RCEP has made a lot of progress in terms of market access and most favored nation international treatment in the trade and services, and also the equal and the fair treatment in terms of investment and assurance of the free transfer of funds and detailed procedures with regard to the expropriation of the investment made in the host country. Although there have been a lot of progress made in the RCEP chapter, in the chapter of the trade and services and investment, there could be more to be done. So we are very pleased to have our esteemed lead speaker and panelist today for this session 2 on the trade and service investment. And we are eager to listen to their views on the what kind of positive aspect we can draw from the RCEP chapter on trade and service investment, and what more needs to be done going forward in facilitating trade and service investment across the region, in particular for the RCEP member countries. So with that, I'd like to introduce first our lead presenter of today, Dr. Widada Anukun Wataka. So Dr. Widada is the Senior Economic Affairs Officer, Trade Policy and Facilitation Section of the Trade Investment Division of the United Nations, ASCAP. She has been leading the ASCAP OECD initiative on Asia-Pacific digital trade regulatory analysis and being an important driver of the various knowledge products and the tools of ASCAP supporting evidence-based policymaking for digital and sustainable regional integration, including regional integration value chain analyzer, and also the regional digital trade integration index, and also the digital and sustainable regional integration index. So I would like to expect from Dr. Widada on her observation and assessment of the RCEP trade and service and investment chapter. So over to you, Dr. Widada.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here, and let me share my screen and presentation. So today I will present my personal assessment on the service and investment provision in RCEP. I'm not the trade negotiator, so I would also love to hear from the panelists as well on the closer observation, because they will participate in the negotiation process. But from my observations, I would like to sum up the key features that I detect from reading the RCEP provisions here. First of all, I think RCEP offers something for us to cherish, especially if we compare RCEP to the ASEAN type agreements, ASEAN agreements or ASEAN +1 agreements. RCEP is an enhancement from the scope and to some extent the level of commitment. It covers various areas and have potential promising structures that have not included in ASEAN +1 agreements. So that's good. My second observation here is RCEP is quite difficult to read. The agreement is long and writing in a complex way. I look at from the first to the end is more than 500 pages, and that has not included various annex and specific commitments, so on and so forth. So if you combine everything, it's go beyond thousands. It also have close reference to domestic regulations. So that means not only you have to read the whole thousands of trade agreements. If you want to use it, you have to go back comparing domestic regulation on your focus sectors in order to understand what you can do, what you cannot do with RCEP. Not having to mention that the natures of RCEP that not offer most favored nations arrangements with other existing trade agreements. So that's mean to really understand what can do and what cannot do. You have to read also back to other agreements that are related to your particular sectors of interest. So that is not easy. And then another outstanding characters of RCEP service chapter is offer negative risk approach, although it offer in two tiers. One set of country have negative risk approach from the date of entry into force. The other set of country will gradually move to negative risk approach within a definite timeline. So that's good. In principle, because negative risk approach is promising in terms of greater certainty for service suppliers. But we will be discussing this particular point in a minute. RCEP also have specific provisions on financial service, telecommunication service, and professional service, and also have temporary movement of natural persons as separate chapters. So this is the structures. And in terms of investment chapters, it's promising that RCEP cover 4 important pillars of investment: protection, liberalization, promotion, and facilitation. And also put in place built-in work program on investor state dispute settlement provisions. So based on this, I would say that in terms of structure, RCEP provide promising starting point for a greater set of countries that join force to liberalize their trade in service and investment. Then let's look deeper into these features. I mentioned that we have to give a credit to RCEP in comparison to ASEAN Plus One agreements. And based on that, it can seen in these tables that there are service sectors that market access seems to go beyond existing ASEAN Plus One agreement. The table put green color to the country and service that compared to ASEAN Plus One agreement, the market access is higher. For example, in professional service, you would see greater access offered by China in legal service, engineering service, and accounting service by Indonesia, architecture as well. These kind of things. So there are selected and important service that enhancements comparing to ASEAN Plus One. However, to be able to evaluate how significant in terms of commercial value to this additional benefit that RCEP offer, you really need to go deeper into sector-specific and country-specific schedules. So if I pick Japan schedules just for giving some examples, you would see that actually when you read the schedules, it's not clear that the level commitment would be high. Taking these examples, I looking at Japan's schedules of reservations, and I found the text says the country preserve the right to adopt or maintain any measure relating to investment or supply of service in industry which were not technically feasible at the time of entry into force. What does it mean? It means it's possible that if in the future there are new service, we are living in a digital world, right? So there would be new service coming up which we cannot anticipate today. This can be excluded. Moreover, it has a statement saying, other than those recognized or other than those that should have been recognized by the government also can be excluded. This is about recognized of today, the day of they negotiate the agreement. So this gives very large room to exclude any service as per self-judgment. Then the second interesting statement that imply clearly you have to looking across all agreements that you have to see what is the preferential privilege offered to you, because RCEP does not allow most favored nation principle to combine, to pull all those benefits in. It says reserve the right to adopt or maintain any measure that accords differential treatment to countries under any bilateral or multilateral agreement in force or signed prior to RCEP. There is also a statement that implies Mode 4 is excluded. It says the country reserves the right to adopt or maintain any measures with respect to the supply of the service through the mode of supply referred in the paragraph blah 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 that the paragraph mentioned Mode 4. So with this schedule of reservations and non-conforming measures, is almost killed many promising expectations that we hope the negative list and the market access in general offered by the main text, and how that small firms could be really understand those hidden implications. I don't really see it's practical unless there are really clear support either by lawyers or by government advisory service that will provide to them. RCEP also have self-judging exceptions. This, for example, prudential exception implication is for financial service. There are security exceptions, and what is the security issues? It's up to a country to consider. It could be health, it could be cybersecurity, it could be anything. There is emergency safeguard. There is a possibility to renegotiate specific commitments at any time after 3 years. So reverse is possible under the mechanism of compensations. And it also allows measures to counterbalance of payment deficit. So with these exceptions, anything could happen. The third important things to temper down our expectations of the level commitments is also about multiple rules of origin for juridical persons. Compared to trade in goods, RCEP is cherished in a way that it's combined rules of origin into one. You have cumulative rules, but that beautifulness is not applied in the service sectors. For juridical persons, all countries except Thailand and Vietnam accept the common principles that it means it is the firm that constitute or organize under the law of the party concerned, and it engage in substantial business operation in that territory. Under commercial presence, it look into the party, the juridical person which own or controlled by natural persons or juridical persons of that party. So this is single rule for that bigger set of countries except Thailand and Vietnam. For Thailand and Vietnam, they simply carve that out and look into three things: whether it's owned by a person with specified 50% of equity interest, whether it's controlled, whether it's affiliated by another person or party. And that also have multiple rules of origin under commercial presence. For example, in Thailand, Thailand have sector-specific commitment. Some sectors, it has to be not exceeding 49%. Some sectors, it go up to 70%. So the problem is, what would you consider as entitled for benefit? For example, if I own a Thai Indian IT firms, and in IT sectors, Thailand consider that it is 70%, not exceeding 70% is allowed for the benefit to invest in Thailand. The definition of Thailand says it is 50%, it is a juridical person of Thailand. Does it mean this firm, Thailand India firm, can access China market, which is part of RCEP or not? This is not clear. So the issues of rules of origin would come and be problematic to interpret privilege under commercial presence or mode 3. I look more specifically into digital related service just to try to find a clear example whether how RCEP compare with other ASEAN related trade agreements. And I found it is quite confirmed about enhancement compared to ASEAN agreements. RCEP has higher level of binding language and scope of coverage when it comes to digital service compared to ASEAN China, ASEAN e-commerce agreement, and ASEAN Australia New Zealand agreement. But if you compare to some bilateral agreements that ASEAN has with particular countries, ASEAN individual member have with selected country in RCEP, there are several agreements that offer higher level of commitment. This is proxy by scope and the binding language of the agreement. So this is the observation about digital service. And then I look into domestic regulations, because RCEP is always say anything you agree now would not mean that it can kill what said in domestic regulations. So if domestic regulation is very strict, it could become de facto challenge for the implementation of all benefits. For digital service, just for examples, here what I found. there is no real issue from trade in goods because tariff is low in ASEAN countries. But there is clearly high restrictive level of the domestic regulation when it comes to policy effect trade in service and also some effect trade in goods. Technical, non-technical NTMs, technical standard, IPR, this level of these policies across ASEAN countries on average is moderately high restrictiveness. And then if you go to policies that hitting directly IT-enabled service, for example, policy related to cross-border data flows, domestic data protection, FDI restriction, policy related to all e-commerce licensing, telecom regulations, or regulations that affect platform operators. This comes into the group of very high level of restriction in the policy. Plus, there is also high level of policy heterogeneity across the region. As you can see that this policy in this range, the indicator shows low regulatory similarity. It means that across ASEAN members, some countries may have no regulations or maybe because of absence of the regulation. But some countries have so many requirements to get the license, for example. So this both policy difference across members as well as the high level of regulation would combine into more difficulties for firms to comply and utilize the benefit that the text of RCEP has put a hope for us all. Going forward, what are we going to do to make this better? I think the key would be related to how to help firms, especially small firms, to understand this complexity of schedules of exemptions and link it to relevant domestic regulations and options in other trade agreements. The help that government has to offer to firms has to be more than a series of talk, conference, or brochure. To start with, read this legal text is not easy. So a simple brief on the sectoral basis is something good way to start, but that is not sufficient. That should be the one-stop service centers that could provide clear and specific answers to exporters and importers who want to utilize the benefit of FTAs. I think it would be challenging for small countries in ASEAN to establish this comprehensive service. You really need to have good officials and good database that can provide all across agreements, all across country domestic regulations to give a useful suggestion to firms that coming to you and ask about how can I export legal, can I do law consultancy service in China, for example. Then RCEP is offering a pathway for renegotiations, for adopt new measures, for change or whatever. So you can decide to maintain, to change, to adopt new measures, but the government needs to make a clear understanding about the trade-off. So that's coming to the evidence that need to back up what are the options and what are the trade-offs. So this has to build up in ASEAN countries, especially small, like an LDC's one as well. the elements that still missing, it should be worked further to establish, especially the mutual recognition, the diversity of domestic regulations need mutual recognition mechanisms to solve and to harmonize those rules. Professional service market access require mutual recognition and acceptance of education qualification. And also the work further to establish and to solve the issues about investor state dispute settlements that is also essential. So given that RCEP has taken 9 years to finalize the comprehensive agreement text, I think it should have been more desirable that these essential components, especially the mutual recognition, should be already established before implementation. Although not, I hope that it would come in not very long future. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Dr. Witata. Thank you very much for your very comprehensive presentation of the issues related to trade and service and investment. I agree that there have been some significant achievement made through the RCEP, but at the same time, there is some a little bit of downside in the sense that some of the dilution of the MFN, for example, may not live up to the original expectation that would like to expect from the RCEP. But also your proposal and suggestions to enhance the awareness of the SMEs, of the huge volume of the text involved there, and also the providing one-stop services for the firms, in particular SMEs, and also mutual recognition arrangement, which can ease some bottlenecks stemming from the different regulatory environment, domestic regulatory environment on the digital area and other areas of the domestic economies in the region. So basically, my takeaway from your presentation is that although there has been the quite significant progress has been made in terms of market access beyond what has been offered through the ASEAN Plus One FTAs, but that there are still some constraints that the traders and the investors in the region can face in terms of the lack of the full acknowledgement of MFN treatment, and also the horizontal restrictions in the sense that only the technically available services will be subject to the commitment in the agreement, and also some restrictions in terms of the mode 4 of the movement of people. So those are the issues that could be addressed in the future through the ministerial meetings or other avenues, which are also made available from the RCEP agreement itself. So now we can move on to the panel list, but before we move on to the panel session, so Dr. Witata, so if you can kind of turn on your camera once again. So based on your assessment, there could be some positive side and the negative side involved at the same time in terms of the trade and services and investment chapters of RCEP. So one school of thought may argue that we'd better have a broader areas of market access, or the other school of thought may, within the smaller scope of market access, to better have a deeper commitment to be made by the member countries. So between these two conflicting ideas or views, do you think that the RCEP's approach in trying to broaden the market access first, then in terms of depth of the commitment, which could be discussed later stages, and also allowing the different transition period for the developing countries, in particular least developing countries in ASEAN countries. So do you support that kind of approach, or would you like to have more advanced discussion about the depth of the commitment to be made among the member countries? What should we prioritize? I mean, conducting the implementation of the broad range of market access first, or should we at the same time tackle the depth issue at the same time?
I think if you don't think about, we have lost 9 years to come to this stage.
Yeah.
RCEP approach of putting comprehensive structures and mentions all important points that should be mentioned is very good starting points. I really do agree. My observation is that it is too long to reach this level, and the time is running out. So now, to make it more really useful in the very dynamic world, you really have to get deep into each area and try to combine and simplify all the rules together with other options in very effective way before it's too late.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Vidata. So I also share your observation in that regard. Now let's move on to our panel session. So we have 3 esteemed panelists joining today. Our first presenter and the panelist is the Professor P.T. Sri Sangnam, who is the Associate Professor of the ASEAN Studies Center of the Chulalongkorn University. And then he has been teaching the international economics and the microeconomics for bachelor and the master's degree students at the university since 2002. And also he has been deputy director for the economic affairs of the Center for European Studies from 2010 to 2012, and deputy director for academic affairs of the ASEAN Studies Center in 2012, both at the university and also before he became director of the center in year of the 2013. So yeah, so the Professor PT, you have the floor now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I would like to share my screen. So greeting from Bangkok, Swadee krap. As a panelist, I'm a little bit worried because since the morning I see great economists, great trade negotiators talking about RCEP. So I try very hard to find my blue ocean area that will not overlap with other participants. So I will see RCEP from the perspectives of geopolitical economies, because nowadays, I think from trade war, from the conflict in European countries, from technological war, from containment policy, I think seeing the thing from mainstream economic is not enough, and geopolitical economies will complement it. So when we talk about geopolitical economies, we start from the map. And this is the map that I would like to show you, because all of us was integrated into a big global value chain since the late 1980s, 1990s. But now today, global value chain that we get used to is a little bit changed. So the bubble size I present in this map represent the GDP adjusted for purchasing power parity. And from this map, you see US is no longer the largest economy in the world, but now you see China as the largest economy in the world with a market share of 18.7% compared to 15.9% of the US. And most of the geopolitical scientists said now US is at the end of American world order, and we are entering into the new world order. With this new world order, we see the rise of China, and China is no longer focused on security issues as the end game, but they seek business opportunity. They seek to make a lot of money instead of being the world police. Hence, we see the competition between the old superpower and the new superpower. And as you can see, since the US is now smaller than China already, somehow US made a partner with third largest economy in the world, which is the group of European countries. When they combine together, they share about 1/3 of the GDP of the world, 30%. Hence, we see right now the clash between the two blocks. Western bloc led by US, Eastern bloc led by China. And this is the main player in this world geopolitical games. We see China, US, and EU. And at the same time, we see Japan. In Southeast Asia, in ASEAN, of course, Japan is the very, very important players because they are the main investor. And at the same time, we also see the new emerging group of countries that are very, very interesting, which is the countries that sit in the Bay of Bengal, such as India, Bangladesh. This is the very, very high potential markets and share about 9% of the world GDP. For Thailand and ASEAN, we rank number 4 with a share about 7% in the world. So when we combine into RCEP, unfortunately, we still cannot bring India into the picture. RCEP share about 30% of the world GDP. Hence, RCEP is about the same size as US combined with EU, 30%. And nowadays, we see the expansion of economic friends from China via Belt and Road initiatives. And at the same time, we see the containment policy by the US under the so-called Indo-Pacific strategies. And from national security strategies of the US, which is the long-term strategic plan of US that govern the policy of US for at least 15 years, US see China as the greatest threats. That's why you see so many policy to contain China, such as the upgrade of US Pacific Command into US Indo-Pacific Command in the year 2018. You see Indo-Pacific strategies from Department of State, Department of Defenses, from White House, from US Trade Representatives since 2019. You see the Quad and AUKUS alliance in the year 2020, 2021. You see the counter proposal of the Belt and Road initiatives, so-called Build Back Better World in the year 2020s. And now we are talking about the new trade deals, so-called Indo-Pacific Economic Frameworks. Hence, this clash of policy leads to a new ecosystem. This new ecosystem will slower the recovery of the global value chain from COVID-19. This will strengthen the great decoupling situations. People talk more about supply chain resiliency, which go on the opposite directions to the globalizations. Now people don't think of the trade investment based on economic, but they have the security driven instead. And of course, nowadays when we talk about investment, people seem to think more about friendshoring investments. Friendshoring, supply chain resiliencies, the conflict between major power need RCEP more than ever. Why? Why RCEP can help us, ASEAN and our dialogue partners, to dealing with these situations. If we focus on trade in services, I think the negative list approach, of course, from morning, we know that there are so many room to improve these trade in services agreements under RCEP. But this negative list approach made at least 65% of RCEP country services sector will be fully open with the greater transparencies. And under the Chapter 8, with special annex on finance, telecommunications, professional services, as well as movement of natural persons in Chapter 9, this is a good guarantee and a good excuse for us, for small countries like Thailand, to the superpower outside the region, that the member state will still be able to make decisions about their economic activities without being too concerned too much about securities and the supply chain resiliency issues. This is the thing that we can make an excuse to them that, oh, because we are abiding by this biggest trade deals in the world, that we still open, that we still talk about liberalization in service sectors. So we are not forced, we cannot be forced to not to use some kind of service by some countries. However, the negotiations to determine the timing, the schedules of the market opening commitments, and the establishment of the mutual recognition standards and common trade facilities are still urgent to build a stronger regional value chain in this area. because, for example, Thailand, what we do in RCEP is we don't have to change any laws and regulations domestically in order to cope up with RCEP. That means the degree of openness of RCEP is not that large compared to other trade deals. So we may need to consider about it. And of course, for investments, the greater area of negative pledge approach in investment liberalizations, the trim plus that not require the performance thing when we would like to invest abroad. These two factors will attract investment flow, because nowadays all countries need, I think around the world, they need the countries that can be the linkage between the two great decoupling. Everybody needs a chain that links China with US and EU. Hence, investment flow into RCEP area is the thing we need, especially for ASEAN member states amid this trade war and the great decoupling situations. So what we should expect next for the trade investment is we need to negotiate on investment state dispute settlements to ensure a greater securities and assurance for investor is needed. So this is the thing that I would like to recommend for the RCEP from the perspective of geopolitical economies. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor PT. So now, so we can have some more discussion after all the presenters have finished with their presentation. So now let's move on to our next speaker. So our next speaker is the Professor Manjiao Chi, who is the professor and founding director of the Center for International Economic Law and Policy, School of Law, University of International Business and Economics, China. His research focuses on international economic law and the policy, dispute settlement, and the sustainable development. And being an author of numerous books and articles, frequent speaker in the international conferences, visiting professor of leading law schools in Europe, Asia, and America, and consultant for the various international organizations. I'm expecting that he can share his insight and the views on the RCEP trade and services and investment chapters. So over to you, Professor Chi.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me first of all start by thanking the organizer, Asian Development Bank, for inviting me. Today, as the previous speakers already mentioned about RCEP and its various provisions and chapters, I would just focus on a very specific provision or type of provision, that's investment facilitation. As actually held by quite a few previous speakers, investment facilitation now becomes a very important thing on the agenda of the recovery of Asian Pacific region, and also for the long-term goal of economic development. I just tried to rely on the provision of RCEP investment facilitation and also provides a preliminary assessment and implications. So here, before we go into the details of RCEP investment facilitation provision, it would be very helpful for us to have a very brief understanding of what investment facilitation is. Admittedly, I would say there is no clear-cut definition at the global level as to what investment facilitation is, but this is a very broad understanding that government measures for streamlining investment regulation or improving investment regulation would be deemed categorically as investment facilitation. Now, here you see on the PowerPoint, there is a picture, and the picture lists several types of investment measures, facilitation measures. And the picture is actually a research project result that's for the German Development of Institute, DIE. So I use this as a description. So very briefly, we have looked at these, the column on the left side, and there are policy areas. So basically, that's the areas where the measures are taken or could be taken to facilitate investment. And here are certain types of measures, including transparency and predictability measures for improving transparency and predictability of investment regulation, electronic governance of investment regulation, cooperation, including especially state-to-state or among different states, cooperation, application of process that's the measures that are mostly aimed at facilitating market access of foreign investment into a host market, and outward investment that's the opposite side to facilitate investment that is leaving the host market. And focal point and review. So there are certain kinds of mechanism established for focal points, contacting points, and similar mechanism that would be helpful for facilitating foreign investments throughout the life cycle in the host state. So for the sake of time, I will not go into too much details of each of these categories of investment facilitation measures, but just bear in mind that investment facilitation measures are very broad in coverage, and two, B, mostly covering state or government regulatory measures. So nowadays, we are sort of fortunate with regard to investment facilitation, lawmaking or rulemaking at the global level, and multilaterally, bilaterally, regionally, and also nationally, we have seen this kind of momentum that countries around the world are speeding up their pace in making rules with regard to investment facilitation. At the multilateral level, we see since 2016, UNCTAD has already issued a 2016 Global Action Menu for Investment Facilitation, identifying 10 different types of actions that could be used for facilitating investment purposes. And WTO, which is more recent, we see that since the MC Ministerial Conference in Buenos Aires some years ago, there were structured discussions of investment facilitation agreement for development within the WTO framework. And the year before last, the formal negotiations started. And now we see the Easter state, and there are certain kind of leaked version of this agreement. But of course, there are also outstanding questions that need to be settled by WTO members in negotiation, including, for example, what kind of measures should be included in this agreement, and what is the form of the agreement within the umbrella of the WTO, and how to insulate or deal with the dispute settlement issues with regard to investment facilitation measures, especially insulate the dispute from investment arbitration and WTO dispute settlement mechanism. So here we see the multilateral efforts. At the bilateral and regional efforts, we see probably more promising developments with regard to investment facilitation. And in this regard, of course, Brazil is widely deemed as a pioneer or as kind of model for the international community with regard to its new model of cooperation and facilitation of investment agreement. Well, this type of agreement actually does not give away with investment protection and investor state dispute settlement, ISA, or investment arbitration. It actually focuses on institutional cooperation and facilitation. It does contain 2 short paragraphs with regard to investment facilitation. Nevertheless, this kind of agreement excludes the possibility of investment arbitration, and therefore investors will have to resort to other remedies to solve potential disputes with the host state. But basically, this is a kind of new model, which is deemed as a paradigm shift of international investment treaty in the very recent years. Brazil has so far negotiated dozens of these kind of treaties, new type of treaties. Now, Europe is also starting negotiating this kind of investment facilitation and sustainable development treaties at the union level. But that said, even if for countries and economies without this kind of specifically motivated cooperation and facilitation agreements like Brazil, existing investment treaties, bilateral investment treaties by BITs in particular, contain various provisions relating to investment facilitation, such as improving the investment climate, removal of bureaucratic impediment, and others. At national level, we see there are quite a few states that are using this kind of investment facilitation measures. Now, let me turn to RCEP. RCEP 10, chapter 10 Article 17 is a facilitation of investment clause, which is not very frequently seen in ASEAN or Asian Pacific bilateral investment treaties or investment treaties. For the sake of time, I will not go into too much details of each type of these investment facilitation measures, but just have a close look at this clause or provision. You see a number of provisions, a number of mechanisms for investment facilitation has been established. Now, I have a few observations before I conclude my short presentation. The first is that with regard to RCEP provision, we see the term subject to its laws and regulations here, subjects in Article 1, subject to its laws and regulations. And this seems to suggest that the investment facilitation obligation for RCEP members are actually denoted by the national legislation. So it is flexible, of course, but this could limit the regional collective efforts for investment facilitation among all RCEP members. And then the terms to the extent possible or shall endeavor to show that the investment facilitation obligations of RCEP chapter, as I've just mentioned, the provision is the best efforts in nature. Of course, that helps to preserve regulatory autonomy of RCEP members, but on the negative side, it could hinder enforceability of the provision I've just mentioned. And final, I would say a kind of shortcoming of this provision is that the measure reflects a narrow understanding of investment facilitation and the strong state orientation. This is helpful to states, and one evidence is that this provision actually neglects investor obligation, that's responsible business conduct or corporate social responsibilities. So these are the issues that I believe that RCEP members should really consider in the future. There are a few very brief policy recommendations, and the current situation calls for more enforceable investment facilitation measures, especially by developing and least developed countries. I believe this is very important, especially for RCEP members. And second, promoting investment facilitation, especially for development, is a multi-stakeholder process that serves investors necessary. It is necessary to engage investors and even civil societies in rulemaking and implementation. Asian economies have different development levels and priorities. As we see, we have different levels of countries here. It is necessary to strike a smart balance between regulatory autonomy and regional investment facilitation standards. And finally, communication and cooperation at bilateral and multilateral level is important in WTO process at bilateral levels, and therefore coordination between different RCEP members should be facilitated and enhanced in the future. So with that, I shall stop here. Thank you again. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Xie. Thank you very much for your very interesting presentation on the investment facilitation, which has been largely overlooked by many researchers and policymakers in the region so far. I take note of your mention about the institutional coordination and the investment facilitation promotion, which can substitute the need for the ISDS, investor state dispute settlement mechanism, or even arbitration procedure. So I also recall the similar issue in the context of ISDS was mentioned from the Professor Pitti's presentation. So he was highlighting the need to have ISDS procedure in the RCEP. So perhaps after the next speaker's presentation, we can open the floor to listen to your more of your views on this ISDS issue from both Professor Chu and Professor Pitti later. So now let's move on to the next speaker, the last speaker of this presentation session today, Mr. Nongchith Kambon Hewang, who is the Director of the Trade and Services Division of Department of Foreign Trade Policy, Ministry of Industry and Commerce, of Lao PDR. He holds a master's degree in the economics with specialization in the international trade. more than 9 years professional experience in all aspects of trade policy, including trade policy formulation and implementation, trade and foreign investment regulations, participation in the WTO trading system, multilateral, regional, and bilateral trade negotiations, and implementation of the trade agreements. So I expect that we can listen to the more hands-on experience-based observations of RCEP, the Trade and Service and Invest chapter from Mr. Nongchit. So you have the floor, Mr. Nongchit.
Thank you, Jungwo, for your introduction. So thank you, ADB, as well, to inviting me for this section. So my presentation is we are covering on the trade. Basically, I would like to share with you on the important parts of this RCEP agreement, especially trade in services, MNP, and investment chapter. So, as everyone knows, that the RCEP agreement is providing the opportunity, secure, and stable trading environment. It is the largest FTA, for say, in the world, with the account 30% of the world trade and 30% of the world's population. RCEP agreement was upgraded from the ASEAN Plus One FTA. Therefore, it is so-called is modern. The agreements, as you know, the RCEP member country difference in terms of the development, level of the developments, and also sensitivity. But we share the same level of ambitious. So for trade in services chapter, it is providing the opportunity and cycle, as I mentioned earlier, for business, investor, and also services provider. And the chapter also providing the rules that's stated clearly in the chapter itself. That's mentioned that's what you can do and what you cannot do, especially for the market access element. As also the services chapter consists of the 25 article. Those were upgraded from the ASEAN Plus One agreement, especially upgraded from the article of the that were upgraded from the article of the scope, and also obligation, the transparency, the commitment, especially the approach, as the Ajahn Pitti mentioned, is very important thing, as we are using at the beginning. Now the offer is using the different approach. Two different approaches, the positive list and also negative list. And also the development article of the safeguard also, and also the cooperation. And also this chapter of the trade in services consists of the three main sub annexes, like the financial services and also telecom services and professional services. Actually, it is new annex in it's not exist in the ASEAN Plus One FTA. So I would like to summarize on the key feature here. In this slide, I would like to highlight on the important parts of the chapter regarding to the trade and services chapter. It's a schedule of the commitment. There are two main approaches, such as positive and negative approach. This is the approach with the member state, member country schedule for their commitment. Some of the RCEP member countries using the positive list approach with ratchet mechanism or future liberalization for some sector or subsector. But at the end of the day, they must transport to the negative list in the agreed transition periods of the 6 to 15 years. For the auto FFNs, actually it is a new element that we never have in ASEAN FTA Plus One. Mostly we only have the negotiations FFN. Therefore, this is in RCEP, this auto FFN is applying. So regarding to the enhancing domestic regulation, this also is very important provision that's providing the policy related to the trades facilitation and also transparency, as well as could be that Vidata mentioned, the domestic declaration is very important part for the implementing this agreement. And also, this is the latest article that I found is updated. I just would like to go through it, and also I would like you to go through, because the time is quite limited. I cannot go in detail. That I have mentioned the periods of in the previous slide. That's the latest of the rule and obligation we have in the services chapter. So, in terms of the movement of natural person, or MNP chapter, MNP chapter is very important chapter for the services industry to around the for business investor, contract service supplier to move around the RCEP country. Under this chapter, there were just only 9 articles that's providing the scope, rules, and market access limitation. So that's all, most of the contents of this article in order to facilitate the movement of the professional and high-skilled talents across the RCEP region, to provide the opportunities RCEP country venture into the RCEP talents market. So for the investment sector, actually, there are 4 main objectives of this chapter. The firstly, to liberalize the investment environment. The secondly, investment facilitation, providing the investment facilitation. Thirdly, the protection in terms of investor protection. Fourthly, the competitiveness in the region. So there are 18 articles in this chapter, which using the negativist approach to liberalize the investment sector, including the mode 3 of the services. And also important provision is that the national treatment and also the most favored nation, or MFN. So look at the opportunity for Laopedia to joining this RCEP agreement. I think it's very good opportunity, like the previous speaker has mentioned. This agreement provide us to opportunity to attract foreign investor to our country, enhancing the potential industry investor target that will use Laopedia as the manufacturing base for the exporting, and also promote the country in terms of the readiness of the for example, the policy law regulation concern to facilitate the investor. And also they're enhancing the economic cooperation and technical as well in terms of the LDC country technical assistance from the developed country in the region is very important for us. Next one, for the challenges. Since Laopedia we are facing higher competition for I think joining the RCEP agreement for the business people locally, they are facing higher competition. The readiness for the local business in terms of the adapting themselves to meet RCEP requirements, and also the transparency also is very important, and that's related to the domestic regulation in order to fulfill the implementations of the RCEP agreement. And also the reviewing of the agreement of the Laopedia graduate from the LDC also is also a challenge from us as well, because as of now we enjoy the flexibility at the LDC. After graduation from the LDC, so the own obligation will be so the next one is the investor state dispute settlement, or ISDS. This actually is this new dispute settlement mechanism for Laopedia. frankly speaking. So we got take time for us to do dissemination, to making understanding, especially the agency concerned to this dispute settlement, to handle with this dispute settlement. And next one, the transposition from the positive to negative list approach for trade in services schedule of commitment. This also challenges for us. Of course, we have transition period for 15 years of the LDC country, but as you know, the RCEP agreements entering into force early in this year. Counting from now, we have 12 years, something like that. So it's quite challenges since this kind of approach is new for our it's not familiar for agency concern, and also our private sector who will fulfill the benefits of this agreement. So in terms of the budget constraint, also LAPDR at LDC also that challenge for us for the budgets to doing the dissemination across the country, the business sector, and also public sector who will implement those elements of the RCEP agreement. So we need the budget for that. So that's the capacity building for the government official to understand of the RCEP also very important. So we need of the budget for that. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you. Back to you,
Yep.
Dongwon.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Dong Chis. Thank you very much for your very comprehensive coverage of the trade and service and invest chapters of RCEP from the Lao PDR's perspective. I recognize you are seeing the quite significant opportunities developed from the RCEP, but at the same time, there could be some challenges in particular that LDCs can face, for example, in terms of the tougher competition from the foreign investment or foreign investors, and also some financial the needs, in that sense, how much the capacity building and technical assistance will be available under the framework of the RCEP from the other member countries. That could be one crucial issue for the development, the least developed countries in the member of the RCEP. So before we move on to the more detailed discussion, so because I've listened to the presentation made by both Professor Pitti and Professor Chi, I'd like to get more views from both of you. Perhaps first from Mr. Pitti and then the Professor Chi. I also understand that there is one provision in the RCEP that after 2 years of entering into force, there will be discussion about the ISDS, and then that kind of discussion is scheduled to be finalized within 3 years after the kickstart of the discussion. So, Professor Pitti, so how likely the RCEP will adopt ISDS in the foreseeable future, and do you think that it is a quite good mechanism to be introduced into the RCEP to facilitate the further investment into the RCEP member countries? Yeah, over to you, Professor Pitti. Oh, so we cannot listen to Professor Pitti at the moment, so there must be some audio problems. So let me start with Professor Chi on your observation and views on the ISDS and the desirability of introducing ISDS into the RCEP.
Thank you. Well, I think as you just mentioned, that RCEP at this point of time does not include an ISDS clause, and in the same time, it's also provided that the members will negotiate an ISDS, potentially an ISDS clause in the future. So there is a question whether ISDS will be included in the RCEP in the future. So I would say this would depend on a number of different factors. First of all, what I think that given the fact that the ISDS does not exist in the current RCEP, RCEP member states do maintain a lot of bilateral investment treaties allowing ISDS. So the fact that RCEP does not include an ISDS clause does not affect the possibility of investor-state arbitration relying on the bilateral investment treaties in other treaties, among the RCEP member states. So I think it's still possible at this point of time. ISDS, I believe that the second factor is that given the fact that the Asian countries are now facing an increasing number of ISDS cases nowadays in recent years, according to UNCTAD statistics, it's possible that the Asian countries are now in a position mostly as the investment receiving destination or receiving country, and it is possible that countries may need investors, home countries may want RCEP members to have this kind of investor-state arbitration mechanism in processes, especially if they consider that RCEP member states, at least some of the member states, they are not, let me say, the developed economies or the investors may believe that the rule of law situation in these RCEP members are not good enough, and therefore they would choose ISDS. So that said, I believe that given the paradigm shift of ISDS and ISDS reforming is now in process, I believe that it is possible that RCEP may let's say, may be negotiated without an ISDS clause. That is right there. But this does not actually hinder the possibility of investors choosing ISDS relying on bilateral investment treaties among RCEP member states. So that would be my guess. So I believe that time will tell. So I shall stop here.
Okay. So I see some question, okay, in the Q&A box. So perhaps this question could be addressed to the Dr. Witata from the UNSCOP, because her presentation also covered the regulatory heterogeneity. So the question was, in order to achieve the envisaged gains of service trade liberalization, do you see regulatory and policy harmonization across membership of RCEP as a key to the successful implementation of the schedule of a specific commitment in the trade and services? So this is about the regulatory harmonization as a precondition to garner the gains from the trade and services liberalization in the RCEP. Yeah.
Thank you very much for the questions and for the opportunity. The short answer is yes, definitely. Regulatory cooperation among RCEP members would be very instrumental for the concreteness of RCEP collaborations and utilize the benefits that RCEP has put in the principles. For example, even the interpretations of exceptions in IPR are still different across various countries. The interpretations and the scopes of laws on e-commerce are different. What you can do and scope of responsibility by internet service provider in China set in a very specific way. In Lao PDR is very broad and it's subject to subjective interpretations on what can be what is the responsibility of the service provider on the internet service. So this kind of different interpretation as well as different level of enforcement would be difficult for trade in service to really liberalize in the region.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Witata. So, Professor Piri, are you connected? So, apparently he's not connected anymore. So, so next question was actually about the yeah, what are the requirements for the data sharing localization access? So that topic will be covered through the second day session tomorrow. So you are encouraged to join the tomorrow session. And then so another question from the floor was there are countries whose level of liberalization may be higher than the others within RCEP. So the schedule of the specific commitment, the trade and services, how this kind of different development stage can be reconciled through the chapter of the trade and services of RCEP. I understand there are different the commitment made, different layers of commitment made, although overall the negative list of the services sector in terms of market access has been made. There are some transition period allowed for the developing countries. For some countries 3 years, and for the least developing countries, even up to the 12 years of transition period is allowed. So in that sense, I'd like to ask that question to Mr. Nongchis, if I may. So because along with the Cambodia and Myanmar, the Lao PDR is allowed quite a long period of transition period. I mean, in transitioning into the negative list from the positive list. So do you think that the 12 or even 15 years of time is enough for you to go through some kind of smooth transition into the negative list, or what kind of challenges you can foresee in transition into the negative list framework in the future?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the question. I personally think that the ambitious or liberalization of trade and services in RCEP is very high comparing to another forum. As you can see, for Laopedia, we open more than 80 subsector, 10 main sector for the RCEP. That's comparing to another the forum for FTA forum. I think RCEP is very liberal for Laopedia at LDC country. Regarding to the transition periods, is enough for us for 15 years. As of now, we put in our priority, and also keeping on the consultation with the agency concerned is very big task for us. And thank you for the other organization helping in terms of the helping the conference in terms of focusing on the how to train us, and also the agency concerned to understand about the trade and services in negative risk approach. So 15 years, I think. Technical speaking, I think it's quite. Actually, it's before it come up with 15 years. We seriously discuss with our CIM country. So for Laopedia, I think it will be enough for us. We're starting from now because of the agreement, the RCEP agreements already into force earlier this year, as I mentioned. So. Of course, we need the assistance from outside as well, the experts, and also the technical assistance is very important for us. Since as I mentioned earlier, it's new mechanism approach for negative risk approach for Laopedia. So not only for our trade negotiator, but the business sector and also the public sector relatives, they have to understand, because they are the one who will fulfill and also the make use of this agreement and also implementing this agreement. That's just my observation of your question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Nongchith. So I understand at least there is some ratchet clause, right? That although even those countries who have adopted the positive list cannot go back to the commitment less than what has already been made in the future. So I have one more question because in the context of the trade and services, transitioning from the positive list into the negative list, the issue was raised that the more capacity building and technical assistance will be highly desirable and required from other member countries. So in a similar sense, I understand, and also our report highlights the need to enhance economic and technical cooperation to bolster the least developed countries' position as a recipient of the FDI and the capital flows. And I understand more than 70% of the FDIs for the least developed countries in the RCEP member countries are coming from the RCEP members, basically. So in the context of the providing the promoting the knowledge sharing, the technical cooperation among the RCEP countries for the promotion of the FDI inflows among the RCEP countries, so what concrete measures could be taken by the member countries in the future? So I'd like to address this question to both Dr. Vidatta and Professor Chi.
Sorry, can you repeat the question again, please?
Yeah, the question was the technical capacity building and the technical cooperation to promote the FDI among the RCEP member countries, yeah, in particular for the developing and the least developed countries.
Thank you very much. Yes, as I mentioned that the level of regulatory capacity vary across RCEP countries. There are countries that have very comprehensive regulatory frameworks, and there are countries that not have important regulations that or have it, but it's not really clear what would be the implications. So gaps like this is need technical capacity to fill the regulatory deficits of so that means it needs support for build up the technical skill of regulators, of policymakers in the LDC's country, starting from having a clear visions on where they see service in their development agenda, and then from that draw into what would be their options with what are the trade-off, and that trade-off, I mean, based on concrete evidence, not based on subjective opinion. So technical cooperation could fill this gap. Not only when we thought about technical cooperation, we normally think about infrastructure. Yes, it is very important, but to use that infrastructure in an effective way to promote trade in service, it needs build up human capital skills from both public and private sectors, from regulator side and from the user side, which is the firms and the individuals in the economy. So these are the capacity building, the trainings, the advisory service that we need to give up for the LDCs with the high level objective of creating interoperable regulatory frameworks for all RCEP countries. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for your feedback on this issue. So Professor Chi, your take on this issue?
Yes, thank you for this question. I think I agree with Dr. Vidatta that capacity building, cooperation, technical assistance, and these kind of mechanisms are important to RCEP members, especially given the fact that RCEP members are quite different with regard to their development levels and also their regulatory framework with regard to foreign investment and service. And I think the real question is how to improve or set up this kind of mechanism for cooperation, for capacity building, and for technical assistance. RCEP members in the RCEP, there are already such kind of clauses, but are these clauses sufficient in delivering useful mechanisms? There are a number of issues I believe that in the future RCEP members need to negotiate and need to discuss. For example, whether there were certain kind of specific cooperative mechanisms established, or broadly whether there is a need for a permanent secretariat for RCEP, something like that. I mean, these issues will be answered and have to be answered in order to make sure that RCEP would play as an engine, a regulatory engine for the countries in this region for a better economic integration and development in the future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor Chi. Thank you very much. Because we are getting closer to the end of this session, so before we wrap this up, I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Nongchit. Would you have any final word to share with us? Because the other speakers have already shared their own views on the various topics today. So from Lao PDR's perspective, any expectation or any challenges or any hopeful undertaking you are expecting from the member countries in the region, for example. So I'd like to listen to your final word.
Yes, thank you very much. For my view on the RCEP agreement, Laupedia is very high expectations of this agreement. As I mentioned, is very liberal in terms of trade and services and investment. We as the LDC country, in terms of the attract, we are a small country. Of course, we look at the how we want to it's an opportunity for us to attract investor to our country because of the opportunity is there, but the challenges is for us also, as I mentioned, in terms of the technical and also in terms of the how we will fulfill of this agreement, and it's very big task for Lao official as me to disseminate this agreement across our country, especially the private sector to fulfill the benefits from the agreement. Of course, in the same time, we are facing in terms of the competition as well, in terms of investor, our local investor as well. So we have to try to let them understand deeply about the policy on what we can do and cannot do in our agreement in RCEP. That I think, and hopefully this RCEP Laupedia will attract more investor for our country. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you all three speakers. Unfortunately, we lost Professor Piri, but we have listened to the very insightful and important issues and the points made by all three speakers during this session. It's again the story of the glass half full. There are still many things to be done in terms of the fully transitioning into the negative list and how to expand and deepen the MFN treatment and among others, and also possibility of introducing the ISDS framework for the better protection of the investors from the member countries. So with that, I'd like to, but also at the same time, I'd like to recognize the agreement has made a good, the significant achievement in terms of market access and also promoting the investment facilitation and also technical assistance and the technical cooperation. So I think that the agreement can be conducive to the promoting and the facilitating trade and services and investment in the region. Okay, with that, I'd like to thank all the speakers for this session, for sharing their insights and the very interesting observations and views with the audience today. So actually, this is the end of today's session. So tomorrow we are having an equally interesting and insightful sessions scheduled for tomorrow. So I hope you will be joining the tomorrow session again, the second day of the RCEP conference. Okay, with that, I'd like to close today's session. So have a good rest of the day. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you and bye.
Thank you. Bye.